So next question that we have here, it says that your network is expanding and you are planning to implement BGP route summarization or aggregation to reduce the size of the routing table. Explain the benefits, challenges associated with the route summary, aggregation, and summarize the steps required for the implementation. So what is route summarization or aggregation? We call route aggregation in case of BGP. Normally we call it like summarization. So let's say, for example, a router is receiving n number of prefixes. It can advertise all those n number of prefixes to the neighbor router. However, the neighbor router is running low on resources. It might not be able to handle those much of routes in its topology table, database table, or the BGP table. Here, since we are using BGP, I would say BGP table. So the problem is, the challenge is that we want to make sure that this router is able to reach to all these networks while maintaining the least number of routes possible in the network, in its table, such as BGP table and the routing table. I don't want to break my connectivity from router number 2 to this destination. I want that this router should be able to reach on there, but I don't want to maintain all these routes in the routing table. So one way to achieve it is to go on the router and configure this thing called route summarization or aggregation in case of BGP. Let's say, for example, these are like 10.1.1, 10.1.2, 10.1.3, goes up to like 10.1. Let's say, for example, 15. So instead of advertising all these 15 number of subnets to the neighbor router, what we can do, we can advertise just one simple subnet, 10.1.0.0/16 to the neighbor router. This is not a correct, this is not an exact summary of these prefixes, but it does cover all these prefixes in this address. Router number 2, instead of receiving these 15 prefixes, it will now just receive one subnet. That one subnet will require less number of resources to be maintained in the BGP table and the routing table. 10.1.0.0/16, for example, is the subnet that is getting advertised from router 1 to router 2. And since this route that we are receiving from the neighbor router, it covers all these destinations, I will still be able to reach out to each and every destination. However, I don't have exact route to reach to those destinations, so I will not be able to do any path manipulation. I will not be able to do any route filtering. Those capabilities we will not have because we are not actually receiving all the routes information as it is. Either the entire summary will be received or the summary will not be received. You will be able to perform the path manipulation for this route. You will be able to restrict the advertisement of this route, but you will not be able to do anything on these individual prefixes. That will be a limitation. However, the resources required to maintain this prefix information will be comparatively very low as compared to these ones. So route summarization is a concept of advertising a summary route to the neighbor router instead of advertising all these routes as it is, so that the reachability is still there and the amount of routes that the router needs to maintain is low. So to reduce the size of the routing table, we can configure this BGP route summarization. Now in BGP, when it comes to route summarization, some other concepts are also supported, such as, for example, while advertising the summary address to the neighbor router, I can use different types of maps. Command is very simple. Just go under the router BGP and then use the command aggregate address and then whatever summary you want to configure. Aggregate -address and then configure whatever aggregate address, network and mask, configure what you want to advertise. Remember that once we configure this command aggregate address, remember that the BGP will advertise summary as well as all the exact prefixes as well. This is the default behavior. Once we configure the aggregate address, BGP will advertise the aggregate address as well as the exact prefixes. We need to add the keyword called summary only. Once we use the keyword at the end called summary only, the advertisement of these exact prefixes will be suppressed. That means the advertisement of these prefixes will not be done. The BGP will only and only advertise the summary route. So summary only keyword is one additional command that we can actually configure after or at the end of the statement. Apart from this summary only keyword, remember that when the BGP creates the summary address for these prefixes, it will not copy the AS path information in that. We can also use the keyword called AS set so that the BGP adds the AS information in the summary address when advertising it to the neighbor router. Because otherwise, if the same summary address comes back to me and I receive it blindly, I accept it blindly, it might cause a loop in the routing network. So I don't want that to happen. So I can also use this additional keyword called summary only. So we have summary on, we can add this keyword called AS set. So we have AS set, we have summary only, we have two additional keywords after this aggregate address command that we can actually have. Apart from that, we can control what prefixes we want to suppress. Suppress map. We have this concept of suppress map where we use a route map to control, to add, to match what prefixes we actually want to add, what prefixes we actually want to suppress with a neighbor router, right? So suppress map that we have here, suppress map is there to control. At the end of this, we can use the keyword called suppress map. There we are going to reference a route map. In that route map, I will mention what prefixes we want to suppress. Suppress map is there to control what prefixes, out of all these prefixes, what prefixes will be suppressed and rest of the prefixes will be advertised as it is. We also have unsuppress map. Unsuppress map basically means that I can control that the router is going to suppress, means stop the advertisements of all these prefixes, but it is going to unsuppress. It is not going to suppress this exact subnet. So unsuppress map can also be configured. Unsuppress map can also be configured. We have other maps such as, for example, attribute map. Attribute map is to change the path attributes of the summary address, like the summary address that we are advertising. To change the attribute of that summary address, we have this concept called attribute map. We also have like advertise map. We advertise map basically means that let's say, for example, I want to advertise the attributes of this subnet in that summary, so that I can match in the advertise map as well. So advertise map means like I want to advertise the attributes of a particular prefix in the summary address. So that is what we are going to refer to as the advertise map. So we have additional concepts inside the summary address, within the summary address concept. Additional concepts such as summary only, AS set, suppress map, unsuppress map, advertise map, attribute map. These are different concepts that we can implement along with the route summarization. Right. So there are a lot of benefits, as you might have understood by now, that instead of advertising all the prefixes as it is, since we are only advertising one summary address, that summary address will require less number of resources in the BGP table, in the routing table. So it will save some resources. And however, the challenges will be like, since we are not receiving the exact prefix information, path manipulation, those things might not be possible. How to configure? So first of all, find out the prefixes that you want to summarize, such as, for example, 10.1.1, 10.1.2, 10.1.3. Second, create a summary for that. Use the concept of network and subnet mask. So create a summary address for that, 10.1.0.0/22. Configure the summary address for the same. Try to match these prefixes as many prefixes that you can match in the summary. So for example, 10.1.0.0/22, it will match like these three prefixes, and then use the command like aggregate address. Aggregate address command you can use in the router BGP configuration to actually advertise the summary address to the neighbor router. In addition to that, we can configure things such as, for example, summary only, AS set, suppress map, unsuppress map, advertise map, attribute map. These are the additional things that you can add on along with the aggregate address syntax.